Americans have the memory of a goldfish. It seems that unless something is dangled in front of their face on a daily basis, they just forget that it exists. That's why, when we suffered the first major terrorist attack on U.S. soil in years, most Americans are shocked. It's a tragedy, but this is not unexpected. We are currently in what will no doubt be a multi-generational clash of civilization. Terrorism is the future of warfare, a low-tech way to inspire fear and sow discord among countries you're battling. All that is required is a truck or a gun and a crowd of people. Make no mistake about it, we are at war. The only difference is today we're fighting an ideology, not an army. And unfortunately for us, ideas are much harder to kill than people. I'm Tyler Chrestman. Welcome to the Chrestman Conversation. Hello, everyone. This week, we are going to be talking about a very important topic. We're going to talk about the terrorist attacks that happened both in New Orleans as well as Las Vegas. And this podcast is basically going to be on the topic of Islam and terrorism, which is one of the most important topics that we brush to the side too often. And we do not go into depth as to why these things are happening and what the future is going to look like. We don't do any of that enough in mainstream politics. So we're going to try and do a little bit about that today. But first, before we get into that, let's go to our favorite comment from last week. Our number one fan, Kevin, said, quote, "Interesting and informative philosophical discussion. Ultimately, each person has to find their own way to create their own meaning," end quote. Well, I do agree with you, Kevin. Finding your own way in life is something that every person has to do for themselves. No other person can do it for you. It's going to be up to you to make your life what you want it to be. There's no other person that you can blame. If your life doesn't turn out the way that you want it to, you only have yourself to blame. This world provides ample opportunities for most people to make whatever they want of their life. At least if you were born in a westernized, affluent country, you have the ability to make yourself whatever you want depending on how hard you want to work. No one's going to give it to you, but you can make your life have the meaning that you choose to drive yourself towards. So I agree with you, Kevin. Thanks, as always, for listening. So this week, we have a much darker topic. Last week was kind of fun. We got to talk a little philosophy. We got to have fun talking about things outside of the realm of politics, and we are immediately pulled back in. 2025 started off with a really dark incident. So on New Year's Day, a driver of a truck intentionally drove his truck through the crowded Bourbon Street in New Orleans, killed 14 people, 15 including himself. The media did a bad job of reporting this initially, but their coverage hasn't been terrible. It hasn't been perfect, but it hasn't been terrible. For those of you who've never been to New Orleans, Bourbon Street is the worst. I don't know why people enjoy it. It's crowded. It's terrible. Everyone's drunk. It's a lot of crime happens on Bourbon Street. It's a tourist trap, in my opinion. I'm not a bar person, though, so I know if you like bars, obviously Bourbon Street is for you. You can go bar crawl. You can open carry your alcohol in the street in your little cups. It's a party place. It's like in Memphis. What's the Beale Street in Memphis? It's kind of the same deal. It's just longer and rowdier. And so I'm not a fan of Bourbon Street, but there was a bunch of people down there on New Year's Day, and this guy drove a truck through the crowd. The driver, we're not going to say his name, it doesn't matter. He was a 42-year-old man from Texas. He is a U.S. citizen and an Army veteran. And when the truck stopped, it's unclear whether or not the truck hit something and stopped or if he just stopped the truck. He got out and he engaged police in a gunfight where he was shot dead, which we say good. I'm glad he was shot dead. That's nice. And later, the police found multiple explosive devices around Bourbon Street. It's at least 2 that failed to detonate. So this guy, he was a U.S. citizen and an Army veteran. At some point, we don't know when, he was radicalized. He said that he was inspired by ISIS. Prior to committing this heinous act, he actually posted on social media claiming that he was loyal to ISIS and their brand of Islamic jihad. So, and also there was an ISIS flag found in his truck. Now, as I have been saying for the past few years. We are in what has been, already is and will continue to be, a multi-generational war for the West. This sounds hyperbolic to some, but it is not. And to others, this rings as some sort of xenophobia or anti-Islamic bigotry, which it is not. This is a fact of the world that Islam, as it exists today, is not compatible with what we consider as Western values or cultural liberalism that has been popular throughout Europe and the United States. This has been a problem decades in the making because of mass migration as well as our political tolerance for difference, which has its benefits and definitely has its drawbacks. There are different types, multiple different kinds of Islamism. And it makes it very difficult to have a conversation on this topic that is rational and reasonable and free of bigotry towards anyone as an individual. Because having these conversations, many people will just use that idiotic word Islamophobic when you talk about it. I'm not Islamophobic. I'm not bigoted against Muslims as people, but Islam as an idea, as a set of ideas and beliefs, is incompatible with the society that I want to live in. And here's what I mean by that, and here's how I'll explain it. You have many types of Islamism. And you heard Sam Harris did a good job of trying to explain this before. You can point to many polls taken throughout the Arab world, throughout majority Muslim countries, which I believe there are 34 majority Muslim countries in the world. You can look at polls about different things and then ask how people would feel about living in this society. You have this group in the middle. All right, there's a small group when you compare to the 1.6 billion Muslims who exist in the world. It's a relatively small group in the middle. You imagine this dot right in the middle of this concentric circle. And the dot is jihadism. These are people who believe in martyrdom, who believe in using violence to achieve their ends, who believe in fighting a physical battle against the West. There are a number of organizations throughout the world that would fall into this. These are people like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, ISIL, the Boko Haram. There's all over the place. There are groups like this. Hamas would be another example, or the Palestinian Authority. These are groups that believe in jihadism as a means to an end to achieve basically the Islamic takeover of the world. Now, there's a debate about what percentage of Muslims in the world this number actually represents. It's hard to pin down. But imagine for a second that it's 1%. 1% of people who believe this. 1.6 billion Muslims. Do that math real quick and ask yourself, how many people would 1% be if 1% believe in jihadism? It's a astoundingly large number. And you say, okay, maybe it's not that much. Maybe it's less. Okay, that's fine. Because it's not only about the dot in the middle of the circle. It's about the circle just outside of that. And right outside of the jihadist dot in the middle, you have another circle representing another percentage of Muslims. This is the circle that concerns me the most. These are your incredibly conservative Muslims. These are people, they don't believe in jihad as a means to an end. They're not fighting a physical war, but they are the kind of people who will use Western civilization's tolerance and liberalism against itself. These are what we call the Islamists. These are people who go to the West and they're apologists for Islam. They're apologists. They say, oh, well, the jihadism, those people are bad over there. However, we have to talk about these other things, and they're the people who obscure. They're the propagandists for Islam and the creeping threat that it plays in Western society. And what's the problem with this? Well, the problem is, as I said a minute ago, when we look at the polls throughout the Arab world, and Pew has done great research on this. There's a number of organizations that look at this. and we look at things that we believe here in the West, Western civilization. What's it founded on? Well, it's founded on a couple things. If you look at, for the example, the United States, our Bill of Rights. It's very common in the West that we have similar Bill of Rights, but the United States is a perfect example because we have this universal Bill of Rights built into our first 10 amendments to the Constitution. So, what are some things that you would think of when you think of liberalism, when you think of Western civilization? You think of things like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom of association. You think of these kind of things. The rights to bear arms maybe, but more we're talking about the First Amendment here particularly. You have the freedom to practice whatever religion you choose in the United States. No one can force you. There's not a national church that you have to worship in the United States. You're free to be whatever religion you want to be. You have freedom of speech, which means freedom of offensive speech, which many people, many liberals, not liberals, I'll say, many leftists like to forget. Freedom of speech includes speech that you don't want to hear. It includes mean things. It includes nasty things. There are certain exceptions to the rule. You can't slander. You can't libel. You can't threaten. But you're allowed to say mean things. You can say mean, nasty, hateful things to people. That is actually covered by the First Amendment. Texas v. Johnson, 1989. Offensive speech, such as flag burning, is covered under the Constitution. So offensive speech you have a right to. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom of association. You have the right to associate with people that you want to associate with. You have the right to assemble in groups. You have the right to protest. You have all these rights in the West. So when we talk about, other things, now, you can, for good or bad, you can say whatever you want. But in the West, we are tolerant of people who live different lifestyles. What does this mean? We don't eat gay marriage, for example. You can have a debate about it, but we don't think that at least 99.9% of people do not believe that things like homosexuality should go back to being criminalized. You shouldn't throw people in jail for buggery. Okay, this is not a thing. You shouldn't be doing that, even if you don't agree with it as a lifestyle choice. We're not out here trying to say homosexuality should be an executable offense. When you look at these polls from the Islamic world, there are three. There are three in particular that you can look at that you should find very troubling if you are a liberal. If you're a person who considers yourself tolerant and peaceful and loving, then you should have concerns. Apostasy is a gigantic issue in the Islamic world. Apostasy is the rejection or to renounce the faith. And so imagine you're born and you're Muslim and you say, well, I no longer believe. I'm an atheist or I renounce Islam, whatever the case may be. Apostasy. There are polls out there. For example, 100% of people in Egypt, once polled by Pew, said that apostasy should be punishable by death. Now, this is not always 100%, but it is in the high 90s in almost every Arab country. If you renounce Islam, they believe it should be a crime punishable by death. This is not compatible with Western values in the United States. It's not. If you come here and you believe that people who renounce Islam should be killed, there is an incompatibility there that cannot be bridged. The same could be said about homosexuality. Many countries in the world still have laws that punish homosexuality, many by death, and a lot of them are Muslim countries. And when you look at polling from the Arab world again, that about the tolerance of homosexuality, many of them believe it should be a crime, many of them believe it should be punishable by death. A number that there in the United States you will never find, even at the height of our war against homosexuality, where people were sometimes locked up for being gay, and nobody was arguing that the death penalty should be the punishment for homosexuality. It's not a thing that happened in the United States. What about women's rights? Should women have equal rights? I think many people in the left would say, yes, women should have equal rights. We have the 19th Amendment. It was passed in 1920. It granted equal suffrage to both sexes. Okay, that's fine. That's great. Women have the right to work. They have the right to leave the home without a man. They have the right to be promiscuous. They have the right to show their body in public. They have all these things that you take for granted in the United States. It's not the case throughout the Arab world. Once again, look at Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is a great example. Women can't leave the house without a male escort. Women are not allowed to drive legally. Women in Iran have to wear a covering at all times. Women in Afghanistan now have to wear a burqa at all times. These are not things that are compatible with Western society. They're just not. And so you say, this is a multi-generational fight that we're going to have with Islam about who's going to prevail. Is Western liberalism going to prevail? or is the fundamentalism of Islam going to prevail? Because this circle, the people who believe these things, it's not a fringe in Islam. According to some things that you say, it might be upwards of 20 to 25% of all the Muslims on the world who believe the things that I just listed. Again, do the math. 1.6 billion people in the world. What's a quarter of that? How many hundreds of millions of people believe these things that you say are incompatible with Western civilization, Western liberalism, the tolerance of the left used against itself to fight a war? And so this is a problem that is not going to go away. Just because it hasn't happened in a couple years doesn't mean that it's a problem that we can ignore. It's not going to go away. It's not going to get better without confronting it head on. And confronting it means being honest. And one of the things I remember back in 2016, I was writing about this, and I was very disappointed in Hillary Clinton because at the time I said I didn't believe Donald Trump knew what he was talking about when it came to the Middle East. I don't know if he can tell me the difference between Sunni and Shia Muslims. I don't know if he can tell me which countries are which. I don't know if he knows the alliances, the in and outs, the things. I thought Hillary Clinton could. I thought Hillary Clinton could do those things. I thought that she, maybe you don't agree with me on this, but I thought that she at least understood some of the issues going on in the Middle East. And when I listened to them in their debate, I said it bothered me substantially that I felt like Donald Trump was telling the truth about the Middle East, a problem that I didn't believe he understood. And I thought Hillary Clinton was lying. I thought Hillary Clinton was smart enough to know that she's lying about what she's saying when she talks about the Middle East and Islam. Islam is a religion of peace. Oh, there's nothing wrong. There's no incompatibility with Western values in Islam. I said, this is not true. It's just not. It's not an accurate statement, and I think that you know better, but I think that you're afraid of people calling you names. And so you're not being honest. And it really irked me. And I remember, you can look back, I'm sure. I guess oh my gosh, how long ago was that now? It's 2025 now. So what are we talking? I guess it was 10 years ago, because this was probably 2015. 10 years ago when I was talking about this, I really thought, and I was a staunch Democrat at the time, I really thought that the Democrats were lying about this issue in a way that made me incredibly uncomfortable. And it hasn't changed. It's gotten worse, if anything, because it's this pretending that there's every religion, every culture is equal, and it's not true. Every culture is not equal. Some cultures are terrible and garbage. I don't have a problem saying that. The Taliban are their own culture. It's not to say that every country that is Islamic in nature has the same culture, because they don't. Every country that's Christian doesn't have the same culture. It's not saying that Islam, everyone who practices Islam, is garbage. That's not true. But the Taliban have their own culture. It's garbage. They're garbage human beings. They are terrible, awful people. The people who are in the Taliban are bad people. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that the culture in Afghanistan is equal to that of the United States. It is not. It's not equal. And there's a... maybe we shouldn't go into this, but there's a thing in Afghanistan, and my pronunciation might be a little wrong here. It's called the Bacha Boys, the Bacha Boys maybe. The Bacha Boys, the warlords in Afghanistan, would keep these prepubescent boys, 12, 13 years old, and they would use them for sex. And now, homosexuality in Afghanistan is a crime that they will kill you for. However, there's nothing gay about having sex with a little boy, apparently, because you don't understand. I'm not gay. That's just my little, I was going to use some bad words there. That's just the boy I have sex with. And so, not compatible with the United States. You can't just go and keep a prepubescent boy, used for sex. It's like the old Greeks used to use women for procreation and boys for pleasure. And so it's very similar to that in Afghanistan in that regard. I'm not going to pretend that that's equal to the United States. I'm not going to pretend that the culture in China is equal to the United States. It's an oppressive society that has a lot of issues. It's not to say that the people aren't great, but some of the ways that they choose to live are different, and they're not as good. The wet markets in China are bad. We should shut them down. I don't care that they're culturally relevant or that they've been around for 800 years. It doesn't matter to me. That's a bad practice. You should stop. And so this idea that liberals have, this cultural blindness. They can't have an honest conversation about the problem that we're facing. And actually, I have a book recommendation, and I'm positive actually, I've recommended this on the podcast before. And if you haven't read it, you're doing yourself a disservice, because it'll talk about this in a way, and it will articulate this in a way that I'm incapable of, because Douglas Murray's smarter than me, and he's a better writer. So it's called The Strange Death of Europe by Douglas Murray. It's Immigration, Identity, and Islam. This book is fantastic. It was written, it has to have been over 10 years old now at this point. Let me see if I can find a copyright date on this book, just on the back. I can't remember. It's got to be at least 10 years old. I could look on the inside, but it's not that big of a deal. The Strange Death of Europe, read it. It basically is exactly what I'm talking about. The West, in their race to be tolerant, has opened themselves up to people who don't want to live in a Western culture. The people who come to America, or in Europe, it's an especially big problem. People who come to France, they don't want to live the French lifestyle. They don't want to live the German lifestyle. They don't want to live the Spanish lifestyle. They want to live the lifestyle from their home country. And rather than say, no, you have to it's a melting pot, you should melt. Instead, they say, well, we have to just respect that, and we have to make accommodations for them. No, we don't. No, we don't. Assimilate or leave. That's my answer. It's not, oh, we have to be culturally sensitive. No, we don't. My culture is better. My culture is better, and you should conform to it if you want to live in America. America is better than Afghanistan. It just is. And I don't want to live in Afghanistan. I don't want to live in Iran or Iraq. I'd live in Iran in 1968. I would live in Iran in 1968. That would have been fine. I'm not going to live in Iran after the Cultural Revolution. I'm not going to live in Afghanistan with the Taliban in control. This is not the way. It is not. We're not going to pretend that it's equal and the same. It's not. So we've allowed this problem to grow and fester because of our tolerance. And tolerance is good. It's nice to be accepting of other people. You shouldn't be bigoted. You shouldn't be xenophobic. You shouldn't dislike people because they're not the same as you. But it's not the same as saying the ideas that certain people hold are bad, and you have to be able to criticize ideas. Islam has a lot of bad ideas within it, and there's no way around that. And to say like we're just supposed to pretend that it's equal, it's not equal. It's not the same. We're not having the same conversation. So remember, it's not the first time these attacks are going to happen. The truck attacks are going to continue. They happen in Nice. They happen in New York. There are countless examples of people barreling into crowds of people because renting a truck is relatively easy to do. It is hard to defend against these kind of attacks because all you need is a license. All you need is a credit card. There's not a background check for renting a truck. It's not like trying to buy a machine gun. It's not like trying to build a bomb. It requires almost nothing to do. They're very hard to defend. It's why the importance of immigration reform is so crucial. Because someone will point and say, well, this guy was a U.S. citizen. Immigration reform wouldn't have helped. Look back on the history of the attacks that have taken place throughout Europe and throughout the United States. You'll find most of them were not U.S. citizens. They were people who immigrated here on visas or were here for refugee status. It's not always U.S. citizens. And imagine this. If we only had to deal with the U.S. citizens and we didn't have to deal with also trying to police the refugees, maybe we would be better at catching some people before they became radicalized in this way. So, and when we're talking about immigration reform, by the way, let's talk about this. Let's talk about this right here. This happened the day after First of all, here's my solution to this as an issue. And I mean this in a literal sense. I'm not being hyperbolic. Deport every single person in there who's not a U.S. citizen. I absolutely mean that. This is not about protest. It's not about you have a right to protest. What this is the people who are in the streets, who are protesting, following an attack by a radical Islamist who killed U.S. citizens. if you are out there in the streets and your first inclination is to protest in favor of another radical Islamic group of people, then you have an issue. And yes, at this point, I am equating the pro-Palestinian movement with the pro-Hamas movement. I do not see a distinction in there once. And if you can't distinguish between your once, you might as well support the other. Hamas is a jihadist, terrible, awful organization. And if you're protesting in the streets and you say, well, I'm out here for the Palestinian peoples, explain to me the difference between what you, quote unquote, want for the Palestinians and what Hamas would want from Israel. And when you can't do it, you have to understand that your protest is helping Hamas. That's all you're doing. So if you're the kind of person who gets out in the street and protests for a radical Islamic regime, no, you don't need to be in America. That's just the way it is. We have no obligation to hold people who want to wish ill on America. Hamas, if they were on our border with Canada, would want to kill Americans. They want to kill Israelis, not because of any settlement issues in Gaza or the West Bank, but because they're Jews, because they're not Muslim, and they're neighbors. And so if they were our neighbors, it would be the same. They don't like us. They don't want our help. They do not share our values. And yet people are in the street protesting them because they don't know better. It's ridiculous. And how about these idiots? You would think that people like this would learn after the whole Bud Light fiasco, but I guess not, and I think it's sad. So this was Allstate.
Welcome to the Allstate Sugar Bowl. Wednesday, tragedy struck the New Orleans community. Our prayers are with the victims and their families. We also need to be stronger together by overcoming an addiction to divisiveness and negativity. Join Allstate working in local communities all across America to amplify the positive, increase trust, and accept people's imperfections and differences. Together, we win.
Okay, you're a tone-deaf idiot is really what it comes down to. You're going to sit there as Allstate. Oh, Allstate. You should have stopped after the first sentence. Tragedy struck America when 14 victims were killed after a horrific terrorist attack. Our thoughts are with the family and the victims and the families. That would have been a fine statement, Allstate. Congratulations. And then you say the dumbest thing. We have to stop being so divisive. Diversity is our strength, blah, blah, blah. What are you doing? Why would you put this ad out? Who approved this copy? Who thought it was a good idea for you to get out there and say, hey, everybody, I know Americans were just killed by a terrorist attack, but what we can't do is be mean to Muslims because that would be bad. I agree. It would be bad. We shouldn't be bigoted towards Muslims. What were you thinking putting this in a video? Can you not understand that saying diversity is our strength in after a statement like this, or after an event like this is a good idea? Who is that ad for? Who do you think is going to buy Allstate because of this ad? If any, all you're going to do is make people angry, which, by the way, on the internet, oof, man, that ad is getting ripped up and down. It was trending on Twitter yesterday. And so just a terrible idea. I have advice for any corporation out there that wants to listen. It's free advice. Feel free to take it. Save your stockbrokers some money, or your stockholders some money. It might be top tier advice, the best advice you can get. Stay out of politics. Don't make statements about politics. I don't know if you know this. It's like Michael Jordan once said about Republicans. He asked why he doesn't talk more about politics. He said, Republicans buy sneakers. Republicans buy sneakers. They buy car insurance. They do all of these things. Why do you alienate half of your base? Unless you're an overt political organization, when you have to talk about politics, why would you make a statement at all? All you do is say, we feel for the victims and their families, and everyone supports that. Even the people who are on the left, they support that. No one wants people to die. But you go on and you say this stuff about diversity and blah, 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 and you realize that that's just going to piss people off. And it did. It just pissed a bunch of people off, and it's just sad. I hope that Allstate gets the Bud Light treatment. I really do, because this kind of nonsense needs to stop from corporations. I don't get my morality from the same people that I buy my soda from, okay? This is not a thing that I need to do. I don't need my insurance company telling me how I should be behaving. Okay? I don't need this. This is nonsense. And speaking of nonsense and embarrassment, we got one more video for you. This is a good one, too. This is, listen to this.
Patrick said we'll be taking over the investigative lead for this event. This is not a terrorist event. What it is right now is their improvised explosive devices that was found, and we are working on confirming if it's a viable device or not. As Chief Kirkpatrick said, we're asking everyone to stay away from Bourbon Street, specifically from Canal Street to St. Anne. That is my ask. Once again, stay away from Bourbon Street, Canal Street, all the way to St. Anne until we can figure out what is going on. Our goal is to provide you additional information at the 11 a.m. press conference.
That is an embarrassing statement by the FBI. I don't know who, once again, I don't know who is putting these people in front of the camera when they're clearly not ready. I'm going to say this. It is possible that this person, I don't know actually what her name is, that she's just nervous because she probably hasn't had to give a press conference that's this big of a deal in her life. Not many people do. So I get that. It's nerve-wracking. But does this video inspire confidence or competence? First of all, use the word pacifically, okay? Don't use the word pacifically. And to come out here and just say, well, this is factually, the day that it happens, this is not a terrorist event. What are you talking about? The FBI, why would you say this? Say it's under investigation. That's all you say. It's clearly a terrorist event. The person is now, they've revised the statement to say it is a terrorist event, but why come out there and lie? None of this displays confidence or competence in what is supposed to be the highest form of law enforcement in the country. You put a person out there who's not ready for prime time. That's all you can say. The statement is mumbling. You misspeak. It said something like we was looking for something. What is it?
We are working on confirming if it's a viable device or not. As Chief Kirkpatrick, and we are working on what it is right now is their improvised explosive devices that was found, and we are working.
Yeah, that just doesn't sound good. I don't know. Stay on script is really the trick for when you're talking to a bunch of people. If you're not used to talking off the cuff, then just stay on script. It doesn't sound good. It doesn't inspire confidence and competence. And I thought it was really funny that this lady, again, I wish I knew her name. I don't know it, though, off the top of my head. I didn't listen to the whole conference. I just saw clips going around. She did get bullied into removing her nose ring, which I thought was funny. Everyone was talking about, oh, Agent Nose Ring over here didn't do a good job, press conference, blah, blah, blah. And then the next press conference, the nose ring was gone. It's kind of funny if you're an FBI agent, you're getting bullied on the internet bad enough that you have to take out your nose ring. I don't know. The whole thing, it doesn't look good when the FBI comes out and says that the guy carrying the ISIS flag, pledging allegiance to the Islamic State, when they say, well, this is not a terrorist event, okay? Meanwhile, there's already pictures going around on the internet of the flag that the guy was flying in his truck being photographed, and with clearly an ISIS flag. So, I don't know. Our law enforcement doesn't inspire confidence. Hopefully Kash Patel gets in there and does some good stuff. Anyway, okay. Also, I'm just going to briefly talk about this. There was a Tesla truck that exploded at the Trump International in Las Vegas right outside the doors. It was driven by a 37-year-old Green Beret, very decorated person. The Tesla, I don't know if it'd be a good advertisement, but it'd certainly be a good advertisement for Tesla. The Tesla stopped the building from being damaged because the steel sides of the building absorb most of the explosions. I'm not going to show the video because there's a dead man in the video, so we're not going to do that. These people were saying these might be related. Probably not. The fact they're both former military doesn't mean anything. They never seem to have any overlap. They both worked at the same place, but not at the same time. And I just think that we shouldn't jump to conclusions, but we also shouldn't close ourselves off to possibilities. Don't be an FBI agent and get out there and say things like, this is not a terrorist event. You don't know when you don't know. It clearly was a terrorist event, first of all. Stop lying. But secondly, don't close yourself off to possibilities. And so I was open to the possibility that these were linked because they happened on the same day, and obviously they both seem very terroristic in nature. Turns out not. Maybe this Green Beret seems like he got in an argument with his wife, and maybe was a bit suicidal, shot himself in the truck before the explosion. But yeah, he died in the explosion. And it doesn't look like it's the same kind of deal. So that's why we're not making it a bigger story than it is. Anyway, we're going to leave it there for the day. As always, questions, comments, concerns, leave them down below. I love the comments, people. Thank you for making it happen. Thank you for helping out the channel with your subscriptions and comments and likes and all that good stuff. I always appreciate everyone out there listening. Hopefully we talked about this in a way that doesn't get us in too much trouble. You never know out there these days, but it doesn't matter either way. We're going to say the truth, and that's all we can do. We can just say what's on our mind. And as always, homework for the week, go read this book, Strange Death of Europe. 10-year-old book, still as relevant today as it was 10 years ago. And I will catch you guys next Friday.